Good evening. I'm Alan Jackson, and welcome to Nashville. January the 1st was going to be a day when I spoke of all the reasons for hope in a new year. Then I woke up to New Orleans and the reports of a terrorist attack on our soil again. That was followed up with the suicide and explosives in Las Vegas. And if the events themselves weren't enough, I was extraordinarily frustrated that as the reporting began, the FBI was reluctant to acknowledge the terrorist connections to what was happening, and it seemed to me all too willing to acknowledge that our veterans had been involved. Well, it's not well known that when veterans mention the number 22, they're referring to the daily number of suicides. Tonight is not about rationalizing what happened in New Orleans and Las Vegas. Killing others, it's inexcusable. Understanding the suicide numbers, we've got to find a solution for that. So joining us tonight is the former White House advisor and former military man, Paul Chabot. Welcome back to our show.
Great to be with you, Pastor, and thank you for taking on this very important topic.
Well, we need your help on this one. When you heard about the tragedies in New Orleans and Las Vegas, and further heard that both of these men were former military, what went through your mind?
Yeah, as I learned more about those cases, first as a veteran, you hear about another veteran taking the lives of others, you get disgusted, you wonder what happened. And that's primarily with the New Orleans terror suspect that took lives. That's a shame of his military background and what he had done carrying the ISIS flag. But then you look at the other veteran in Vegas, much different case, active duty, Green Beret, multiple awards, 5 bronze medals, 1 V for Valor. Didn't take anybody else's life, did injure others, and you look at the mental health implications behind him and his history, and you can replicate that, Pastor, across the board, across so many veterans that are tipping on that line to potentially taking their life today.
Well, what happens to someone who served, they come home, and they seem to fit back in, but then it seems like they crack, they join the enemy, ISIS, they carry out a plan to murder as many civilians as possible. Can you help us understand that?
I think there's always going to be that negative percentage that joins any organization, from law enforcement to the military. Again, it's disgraceful. We've seen it happen a number of times in our U.S. military with veterans doing horrific acts to our own citizens. But then there are others. We have this other segment, a large segment of veterans. We lose about 22 a day, close to 8,000 a year. And having looked at this for a number of years now, I think part of what's happening here is certainly our VA system is failing. We deal with mental health, but also we send our veterans overseas to literally fight evil, and then we bring them home, and literally evil surrounds them to help take their lives. And I think that is where we are failing as a society. Right now, the VA is not doing very well. But veterans are a unique breed. We don't like to ask for help. It's very difficult to ask for help. But also critically important is that veterans want to be with other veterans for help. Pastor, one thing I think that can help our nation right now is to encourage churches to create more veteran life groups for veterans, by veterans, joining veterans weekly. I've been a member of PTSD groups, other groups, and it's phenomenal when we are together united. Because when we leave military service, we come back into civilian life, and it's very difficult for civilians to understand what the men and women of military have been through. So right there is a very strong transition and almost a call to arms for our churches today to get engaged with your veteran population, advocate for veteran groups in your churches. That, I think, will make critical headway going forward.
No, I like your suggestion. It's something we can do and not just wait for Washington. We've had a variety of groups similar to what you're describing here in our own congregation and have seen the benefits of those over many years. Why is it that 22 suicides a day, every day, is not in the national news? How's that allowed to go under all of the media radar?
I think I'm disgusted by it. I think we've gotten numb to society from what happens over and over again. I'm going to read to you briefly 3 quotes. I am on a number of confidential or private Facebook groups of other veterans, many veterans suffering. And almost daily, there's communications on there. I'm just going to read you a few without giving the names. This is a wife. She writes, "After losing my husband to PTSD in 2019, I found myself wanting to join him many times during the first 2 years. but she reached out to a crisis line. She had positive experiences each time with a very critical phone number that hopefully we'll talk more later about, which is 988. Richard is another veteran. He said not suicidal at all, but he embraces death and he's ready for it. Pastor, this is what I want to discuss briefly because this is where I think we really miss it in our society. Is many veterans don't want to take their lives, but they are dealing with such traumatic pain or PTSD that they feel as if their life ended, that pain would end. That is the other part of what we have to address here, is that they're not actively trying to take their own lives, but they feel as if death were to come, it would end the suffrage. So that is also a missed talking point of what we have got to acknowledge, because I see it so many times within these networks of veterans that are sharing their comments and how they feel. They don't want to take their own lives, but they feel like the pain of the memories and the lack of the care of what they're getting, that ending their life could end the suffrage. And this is where we can do so much more work through veterans outreach.
Well, let's stay with that for just a moment. You know, I live in the church world, and we provide all sorts of groups for trauma points in life, cancer survivors, people who've gone through divorce. As I said, we've done groups for military, but what I hear you describing is it's not just a nice idea, it's really essential. That we don't need another program in Washington. We need people across the heartland of America mobilizing in their churches or elsewhere to help the veterans be together, to help one another through these very difficult challenges as they re-enter their routines.
It is, Pastor, and also let me put something else very direct and forward out there. Is when America puts our men and women to fight overseas, we have got to fight to win and leave victoriously. When you think today about I was served in Iraq, I know a lot of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. When you look at that pullout in Afghanistan, you look at how we leave these places, veterans today that are suffering, they came home, they lost a marriage, they lost a job, and they ask themselves, what did they fight for in this country? We've got to make sure that certainly if we're going to send our men and women forward to fight evil, that we fight to win. So when they come home, they can celebrate that victory for their lifetime and not a disgraceful pullout like we saw in Afghanistan. There are men and women that served overseas today go, what in the world did I sacrifice leaving my wife and children and everything for, when we just simply wash our hands and walk away and everything goes to hell in the world? If we're going to fight, we better fight to win. And our legislators, our policy folks, and our presidents that put us to fight to win every single time, not an exit strategy that looks like defeat in our lives, because that is where the tremendous hurt and this guilt and this what did we sacrifice so much for impacts us mentally, and it also impacts those around us, our loved ones, our children, our spouses, everybody else that we're connected to. That is what's missing, that if we fight, we've got to fight to win. We're not afraid to fight, but put us in battles where we're going to come home and we're going to know that what we did made a difference.
Well, I appreciate your counsel. I have found that a simple thank you, not only to the veterans, but to the families of those who are active military, just an expression of appreciation and gratitude for the sacrifices they're making, makes a tremendous difference. Again, I'm not waiting for Washington. Let's go be the difference now. When we come back, we're going to talk about what Paul does to counsel soldiers who may be on the edge. We'll be back with more from Paul Chabot in just a moment. We're back now with the former White House advisor, Paul Chabot. Paul, what do you say to veterans who may be contemplating taking their own lives when they call and ask for help?
Absolutely critical that they get on the line immediately. 988 is a critical line. Nationwide, veterans can press #1 for veteran specifics, but 988 is really the 911 now for mental health across this country, not just for veterans, but the entire population. Veterans has a segment kind of broken out in that, so please press #1. There's also websites, which I'm sure we're going to discuss, the veteranCrisisLine.net, extremely important resource for veterans. But also join and find groups. On Facebook, there are confidential groups that our veterans can join right now, where there are hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of veterans that are sharing their ideas. And I see these conversations daily. Some engage profusely with these veterans that are expressing their feelings, which is critical. It's also important that we do not let a veteran be alone. And also, if we at all feel that somebody is about to take their life, a veteran or somebody else, you've got to get on the phone and call 911. Intervention is absolutely critical. But to the veteran who's sort of borderline right now, who's struggling with this, 988 is a great first step, but also being around veterans is absolutely critical, whether you're doing it socially on social media or in person. VFW, American Legion, DAV chapters, they're all over the place. The more we are around people like ourselves, we share the stories, the emotions, the feelings, the challenges, the better we can get through this together. Think about this, veterans. When we served overseas, we all wear, the same uniform, different branches of service. We didn't care what color you were, what state you were from. It's that we loved our country and we fought for something together. When you come home, you might take that uniform off, but that's it. Everything else about us, the camaraderie stays together, and we are still number one in backing each other. So leaving the uniform, coming home as a veteran is just as important as you being overseas in the foxhole or wherever you may be, and communicating strongly with your veteran men and women counterparts across this country.
Well, it seems to me the Pentagon has essentially stopped showing what happens during war. Reporters can only embed with soldiers in a very controlled environment. That's very different than it was during previous wars where the public had an up-close view. In addition, even when a soldier is killed, TV cameras aren't allowed to record the flag-draped caskets when they're unloaded back home. The only exception is when the president is there and wants to be seen. Well, I would argue that this also hides the truth from the American public and perhaps contributes to the issue of our vets being ignored. Am I wrong on this?
Yeah, look, the public needs to see the real life because we see it in the military. We've got a lot of young men and women that join the military. Think of it, 18, 19, 20 years old. I spent 21 years in as a reservist and then activated in Iraq, but many spent 20 years full time. My heart really goes out to this younger generation, the 18, 19, 20-year-old, those that served in Iraq and Afghanistan at a very young age, still forming their boundaries in life and the terror and horror that they had seen. I feel that the American people need to understand and see what we see because we saw the death and destruction overseas. You need to see it at home. And this is why, what I said previously, when our country sends our men and women to fight, we have got to fight to win. You never want to send your men and women over to fight to lose. You've got to give them the equipment and the training to win. And when we go overseas to fight, we've got to make sure that the end state is to win. And what does victory look like? Because coming home victorious, and unlike how the Vietnam generation was spat on coming through San Francisco airports, they blazed the trail for a lot of improvements that we see today with veterans. We still have a long way to go until we get that number 22 down to 0.
Amen. Well, the Veterans Administration has frequently been a target of criticism. President-elect Trump clearly has the vets on his radar.
I just said to Robert, how's it going nowadays? How is it going? And he said they're getting rid of choice rapidly. Choice is when you can't see a doctor rapidly. You go outside, you find the doctor, you get yourself fixed up, and Sarah, we pay the bill. And it was a great thing, and he said it's rapidly not being used. We're going to go back. We get back in, we're going back to that, right? We're going back to it immediately.
Well, is this something the president can do without having to wait for Congress to act?
Yeah, look, President Trump did something amazing, really pushing forward the Community Care Act. And what is this? This is where if the VA can't get you in within the first 30 days, and now actually numbers really don't matter, you can go to the private sector for private health care. I'm a disabled veteran. I can now go into the private sector and get health care for virtually any single treatment or ailment. And that's what our veterans need to know. Is not many are aware of the community care, this act that President Bush pushed forward to make sure that we don't have to wait in the lines at a VA for a system that is just very difficult to work through. You can actually get phenomenal care in the private sector paid through the VA. So be sure, veterans, that you're aware of this. Spouses, caretakers, look into the Community Care Act. I know when Trump comes back in, he's going to push this fast and forward. He believes in what the private sector can do augment and supplement this crisis that we have with our military veterans.
Well, you've mentioned some options already, but before we go, can you point our viewers to any public resources they should know about if they know a veteran who may need help?
Absolutely. So 988, remember that is the 911. The other is veteranCrisisLine.net. Again, veteranCrisisLine.net. Lastly, Pastor, I know we've talked a lot about veterans here. I also don't want to forget our law enforcement. Many of them commit suicide as well. We have a crisis in this country with our law enforcement community. They see the terror and horror on the streets and the jobs that they do daily. Many of us who wear the uniform are afraid to acknowledge these issues that we deal with. But I will tell you, when I retired from the Navy 2 years ago, in my retirement ceremony, I said something I probably wouldn't have said 20 years ago, afraid that I might lose my job. And it's this, Pastor, it's that we are all broken. Every single one of us, we are broken. We've got to be able to accept that and reach out for help and find people that share the same effort. And so, Pastor, thank you for bringing attention to this. I really want to see the churches engage across this country in creating veteran life groups and getting that out into every single community and city and town across America, because our veterans right now are looking for that, but they're not hearing about it. So let's please try to advocate for more veteran life groups across this country in every single church.
Well, Paul, thank you for joining us again. We're going to stay on this in the months ahead with your help.
Thank you, Pastor. God bless you, and God bless all that are watching and helping to make a difference.
Amen. Well, in a moment, I'll have some additional thoughts and reasons for hope. If you're a veteran, a police officer, a first responder, we salute you. We offer you our heartfelt gratitude for defending our freedoms and liberties. We understand that your discipline, your obedience, willingness to be under authority, it changed the destinies of other people's lives. And for that reason, I call you heroes. We need a new generation of heroes, and I nominate you today. I can only imagine the burden you carry from what you experienced on your assignments. Well, my plea is to all the Christ followers, to people who sit in churches and imagine yourselves to be people of faith. Be aware. Listen to those around you. See if they need help. Think about others more frequently, not just about yourself. Matthew 5:14 says, "You're the light of the world. A town built on a hill can't be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." That's our assignment, is to be light in this world. And I think for far too long now, we've been waiting for someone else to do it. People ask me frequently, what's the church going to do about this? And I always respond the same way. Well, I'm not certain. What do you plan to do? Because at the end of the day, we are the church. It's not some mystical group of people that live someplace else. We've waited for Washington. We've waited for somebody else. Let's decide to be the difference and be a light in the midst of the darkness. If we'll do that, there's more reasons for hope than despair, I promise. Well, that's my message for tonight. And after a short break, we'll start looking at your messages. Thank you for taking the time to send your emails, your thoughts and ideas, your questions. They're an important part of the program. Before I read those, I want to extend my invitation to you again. I'm inviting my friends all over the country to join me in reading through the Gospels at the beginning of this year. 10 or 15 minutes a day. It's about a 60-day journey, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The reason I'm inviting you is I believe if we'll take that time, it will bring the blessing of God into our lives, our homes, and our nation. That's worth an investment of a few minutes each day. I hope you'll join me. You go to the website and get all the details. Now for your emails. Lisa Green from Kingsport, Tennessee. Thank you for your time and effort that you put into a TV program. You're a vessel being used by God, as evidenced by the godly biblical truths you proclaim in your sermons, as well as addressing the issues in Alan Jackson now. Thank you again. I'll pray for continued Spirit-filled teaching. Well, thank you for your opinion, Lisa. It's our lives being changed that are the real evidence. I want to encourage you to ask your friends to join in watching the program. It will help all of us. 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Central Time, or you can find every episode on YouTube at Alan Jackson Now. If you miss an episode, you can see it there. Your participation, it makes a difference. Take a moment to send your emails to comments@alanjacksonnow.com. Your feedback and questions, they do a lot to shape our show. I'm Alan Jackson. You have a wonderful evening.